Hi, I'm Dustin, the creator of Terminal, and we're going to walk through the input-output screen of Terminal's first chapter. When you're playing the game, you'll have already watched the introduction, and you're going to have seen what Tera, the protagonist of Terminal, is really up against. Her computer's been taken over by something that wants to disclose all of her secrets, which are buried throughout her computer, among journal entries, among notes, and recordings with her counselor and with her parents. And we don't yet know what this entity in the Terminal window is quite after. Tera's internet connection's been turned off. It was shut off automatically when the entity took over the machine, but it's trying to turn that connection back on so that it can share all those secrets I mentioned. And Tera obviously is trying to keep that connection severed and lock this intruder down permanently. And so that's where we find ourselves. We're facing the screen mid-conversation between Tera and the Terminal. Now, Terminal as a game is what I'm going to call a command line escape room. You're locked inside this haunted machine, and like an escape room, you need to use the tools already inside the room to get out. Now in Terminal, this means that you need to understand the language of the game and then use that language to come up with the correct words to progress and uncover the rest of the story. Now this chapter 1, is called Legacy, and you'll see that the outputs of this chapter revolve around stories and concepts from Tera's past. You can actually play chapter 1 in full right now. I've added it as a demo on Terminal's Steam page, and I'll share a QR code at the end of the walkthrough. We're getting Tera's background from the perspective of the Terminal that's looking back at us through the screen. And we'll become a lot more familiar with Tera as we input things and decipher the outputs. We're going to try to let the story of Terminal shape the mechanics of the game itself. Once again, we're using the tools inside the Terminal, the words and the sentences on the screen, to help us escape. Terminal's game mechanics and story, for that reason, are really one and the same thing. Now, just before we got here at the end of the introduction, a window had popped up on Tera's screen with the phrase, "Add another small step in the control of nature." Now, this phrase at the beginning of each chapter, this prompt, is everything in Terminal. It's going to be the prompt from which we're going to build each of our inputs. From a story perspective, it's going to give Tera hints as to the codes that'll shut down her machine and lock up this intruder. Now, from our perspective, we need that input for the generating the correct blend of words from that prompt, add another small step in the control of nature that'll help us get out of chapter 1. Now, the best way to start each chapter of Terminal is just to enter the word help, which is going to take you to the help menu. And this help menu is going to give you a full guide on how to play the chapter. And each chapter is going to be a little bit different, at least from the others. So use the help menu to guide you along the way. Now, right at the top, you'll see the chapter prompt, add another small step in the control of nature, which is what you'll be pulling the words from to build your inputs. Now, that prompt is part of a quote from John Bardeen in a lecture he gave when he received the Nobel Prize for inventing the transistor. It was his first of 2 Nobel Prizes, and he gave that lecture on December the 11th, 1956, and that was 66 years to the day before Terminal takes place. It takes place on the night of December the 11th, 2022. And John Bardeen received that Nobel Prize when he was living in Urbana, Illinois, which is where Tera's lived her entire life and where Terminal takes place. So add another small step in the control of nature is going to have a lot of significance to the entire Terminal story. So keep it in the back of your mind even after you get through chapter 1. Each input throughout Terminal has to start with a verb, just like you might input something on your computer's command line. And those verbs are always going to be highlighted in bold here in the help menu. So we have 2 in chapter 1. We have add and we have control. And this is all Tera has at her disposal, this initial prompt. Tera's hid the command she built to lock down her computer all over the machine. And she knows that one of those commands is hidden here among the words in this specific prompt. That correct input, like any other throughout Terminal, is going to start with a verb. And it's going to be either 2 or 3 words. Every input except help is going to have 2 or 3 words to it. That second word can be another verb, or it can be another word like another or small. But every one of the words in this prompt is going to be usable. So the correct input could just as well be something like add in or add of. And even if it's not the correct input to get us out of this chapter, the Terminal's still going to input something back to us. In fact, it's going to respond to everything we input. And we need to deconstruct that output to then see if we can decipher any hints that might lead us to the correct input. Fundamentally, the game is all about deconstructing each output that you receive. Now, sometimes the correct input's going to have 2 words, sometimes it's going to have 3 words. So we're going to try both 2 and 3 word inputs just to see what we find. But let's return to the input screen and test some inputs just based on our prompt here. And you can see that we already have 3 initial prompts on the screen. These are inputs that Tera's already tested during the game introduction. And check them out. See how they're each different blends of words from that prompt. We have add another, we have add small step, and we have control step nature. And you can see we have 3 different outputs from that. In the first, we see that we're here on the night of December the 11th, 2022. It's dark, it's bleak, it's cold, and the terminal's really taking an aggressive tone with us that's going to become familiar over the course of the game. Now, as we jump in, I'm just going to try a one-word entry just to show you what happens if you enter an invalid input. And invalid inputs can be a lot of different things. They can be too few words, they can be too many words, they can be words that aren't from that initial prompt and another small step in the control of nature in this particular chapter. But in our case, I'm just going to enter a one-word input, and it's going to be the word control, just one of our 2 verbs available to us. And the terminal is going to tell us that there's nothing it can do with our input. Now, as I mentioned, the only one-word input that's always valid is the word help, which is what you should always enter first in each chapter. Now with that, let's just look at one of the outputs we have already shown to us on the screen here and just see if there are elements we can pull out of it that can help guide us to the correct input. We'll just use control step nature. You were studying typography in the Pine Lounge at the Illini Union when you noticed a knot in the wood column in front of you that spelled out Tera in a spiral pattern, the condition of all things in your life at that moment except what felt some days like hope. Now the terminal gives us a story about Tera here, this time in a student union when she's in college. And in December 2022, Tera's 30 years old. So this story that the terminal is referring to is probably 10 years or more in the past. And it's not clear right away whether that length of time is hinting at the correct input in any way, but let's just keep it in mind. Now, one of the motifs throughout Terminal is that mysterious and powerful things seem to coalesce around Tera. That doesn't necessarily mean that they give Tera any more significance than anything else. Terminal has this magical realism aspect to it. Exceptional things seem to happen to Tera and happen around her, but rather than elevate Tera, they seem to weigh her down. The Terminal is going to remind Tera time and again not to overestimate her own importance. And like a lot of us, Tera's going to find herself looking for symbols and meanings in the universe to show that she's different, to show that she matters. But ultimately, everything seems to be equal in the universe. And maybe that's giving us a personal message, the message that we, like Tera, don't really matter any more than anyone else does. Now, the Terminal's not a nihilist here. In fact, in the game introduction, it tells Tera that everything it says has meaning. And you'll see that in your individual playthrough. But then if everything has meaning, does anything then have meaning? Now, this output reflects on the input control step nature. Tera was in a dark place at the time, but she got this rush of hope that she mattered in the universe. She thought her name was carved by nature into the wood of that column. But the universe doesn't seem to give her any other messages. And nature doesn't necessarily have to be speaking to her either, because everyone's known about that carved name forever. Now look here in the third sentence, we have the word adding. It could be a hint of another one of the words for our correct input, because add is in our initial prompt. It's the first word, add another small step in the control of nature. And we get lots of glimpses of nature here as well. We get switchbacks, we get maple bark, we get the sun, we get the clouds. So maybe then we switch courses and use an input that starts with the verb add, and then we can add onto that the word natures, because we get all these references to nature, and we'll just leave it at that. Try those 2 words. How many times have you felt like there was too much beauty in the world? Now, this isn't our correct input, obviously, but we still have a lot we can potentially pull apart from the output. First off, I want you to look at the length of the output. We have 3 sentences here. In the last output, we also had 3 sentences. And we had 3 sentences in the output before that. And even in our first output, we had 3 sentences. We're seeing the same number of sentences, those 3 sentences every time. And that might hint that there's significance to this quantity. 3 sentences might then imply maybe 3 words in our correct output. Now let's look again at all the references we see to nature here. We have the beauty of the world. We have the glow of the sun. We have the brushes of the leaves at night. We have the clouds. And you're going to see Terminal use poetic language like this all the time. The tone itself might be aggressive, but there's going to be a beauty to it, independent of, or maybe even because of, its extreme ends. And we see once again this theme of control. Something in this world, this essence, is controlling nature and is controlling us. There's a theme of quiet to the output. Sometimes Tera's taking in the beauty of the sun, and then other times she's hearing the whispers of the leaves. And it's easy to get overwhelmed by the beauty the world chooses to show us. It can surprise us, and then other times it can stare us directly in the face. The output always reflects on the input add nature. Does the world add too much beauty in nature, so much so that it makes us question our own place in it? Can we measure up to it? Tera has these worries herself all the time. The world took her dad from her, and if he was the best in what she found in the world, then where does that leave her in it? Terminal says that Tera has a lot in common with him, but maybe not quite enough. And keep in mind that theme of isn't quite enough. That's going to come up again and again in the Terminal story. Now, thinking back to the game mechanics, what could this be telling us about the correct input? We have things like nature, we have control. I would say that nothing about this output suggests anything small, except for maybe the quiet among the brushes of the leaves. In fact, there actually seems to be some grandeur to it. We have the sun, we have the amphitheater, we have the clouds. So for now, when we think about the words from our initial prompt, add another small step in the control of nature, we could probably put that word small to the side for now. But let's think of some of the other less obvious words. We have words like in, of, or the in our initial prompt. And remember, as you play Terminal, the correct inputs don't play favorites. So words that might be significant to us are not more significant to the story. Don't bring anything outside that escape room into the escape room. We use the tools that are already inside the room to get out of the room. In this case, the tools are going to be the outputs that show us the significance of individual words. So all of your assumptions from outside the game are not going to help you in here. And let's start where we started last time. So we have add nature, along with the idea that we might need to use 3 words to escape chapter 1. We have those 3 sentences. And we seem to be circling around concepts of nature as well as concepts of control. So we're going to try another input that goes directly at those. So we'll try add, control, nature. What fires together wires together. Now, there's no story about Tera in this output. Sometimes the terminal wants us to simply reflect on the state of everything rather than the state of Tera. But everything eventually comes back to Tera because this is her story. Here we get a mix of technological concepts. We have mechanical ones like wires. We have biological concepts like neurons. We have economic concepts like manufacturing and consumption, along with ethereal concepts like fantasies and the infinite. The terminal likes to pull from all types of different disciplines, all for that same goal of pushing on Tera's psyche. And we get this mysterious poetic closer here of a third sentence. What I am today is nothing except what you've already been your entire life. What's the terminal saying about itself? We don't yet know anything about it, but it seems like this ghost inside the machine is actually making itself out to be something very real, something very natural. And we get these concepts that reflect back on our input. We get words like assembled, like fantasies adding on top of fantasies and memories adding on memories. We also get the word trained, as if everything Tera learns is being controlled by the thoughts and the movements that preceded this specific moment in her life. It's biologically deterministic, but it's also philosophically deterministic. And of course, it's all going to be built on nature itself. We all are. The terminal forces us to ask if we're all just mirrors of each other and mirrors of what's all around us. Now, I want us to go briefly back to the word control. We have some insights from what we've seen, but sometimes it can still be helpful just to test out a different mix of words and see what comes out. Not only from the perspective of building out the story, but also identifying that correct input. So let's do an input again of 3 words, and we're going to start with the word control. And we're going to add a second word of step. And then we're going to add a third word of. When you were a girl, a few doors down from your house on Philo Road, a couple lived with 7 Dobermans, which they said were each born on a different day of the week. Now, like I said, even the unusual words in a prompt, words you might not expect to be part of a command like of, have meaning, and they often have a lot of meaning. Remember, don't bring in anything from outside of Terminal into Terminal. All you need are the outputs, because every output is 1, going to tell the story, and then 2 is going to hint at the words that might be in the correct input to move on in the game. As I mentioned earlier, the story and the gameplay are one and the same. Now, this output tells us a story about Tera growing up. She was raised on Philo Road in Urbana, this college town, and we get a number. We get the number 7. Numbers have endless meaning in Terminal. An output might show a number, it might show a group of numbers. Sometimes we might get repetitions, we might get allusions to numbers. So pay close attention to any number that you see, because it's almost always hinting at something about the correct input, as well as something thematic about the chapter or maybe about the whole story itself. Now here we see 7 Dobermans. We have 7 Dobermans for 7 days of the week. 6 times Tera's going to feed these dogs. She's going to go up the line, she's going to go down the line, up the line, and so on. And the terminal says to Tera that she has her dad's qualities still. Now, that could be something genetic. It could be something learned. It could be a form of gene expression, but her dad's going to cast a long shadow no matter what. The terminal wants to break Tera's faith in herself and in her beliefs, and that's really the central conflict of Terminal as a whole. It's a horror story about the erasure of identity. The terminal's trying to convince Tera that it knows her better than she knows herself, and it's timeless. Deconstruct her history, telling her that she remembered things differently than they actually were. The terminal might be telling Tera a familiar story to her, but it's distorting the takeaways from that story. And we're going to see it deconstruct her relationship with others. It's going to deconstruct her relationship with technology itself. It's going to deconstruct her thoughts, and then it's going to try and deconstruct her entire self. It has access to her memories that are stored in these artifacts throughout the machine, and that's really the pathway into Tera's mind. And then meanwhile, we're deconstructing each prompt and each output on our own as we play the game. So there's this interplay between us deconstructing the outputs and the terminal deconstructing Tera. Now we see the word nature again in this output. So maybe the repetitive feeding process of the dogs represents something like steps that Tera's controlling. And that's about all that we can pull out of this particular output that I can decipher. So this is where I'm going to leave you in the walkthrough. And I hope this gets you started with terminals that you can then pull the themes, pull the story, and pull the gameplay out of each output that you see. Now, between this walkthrough, the help menu, which is always going to be available to you by entering help, and then whatever you decipher on your own, you really should have no difficulty getting through to the second chapter. But I've also added some helpful notes for you for each chapter on the project's website, and I'll share that here, terminalfiction.com. It even has links to some materials that you can use to keep track of your inputs and your outputs, which could come in handy as the game gets more complex in later chapters. But if you really find yourself getting stuck in chapter 1 or even in any chapter, I've added an emergency exit, and you can type full text in any chapter, and that'll allow you to see every input and every output in the chapter laid out right in front of you. And if you might prefer to just read the chapter in full, that's fine too. I wrote Terminal's chapters to stand on their own as a single story, but I really recommend doing whatever you can not to look at the full text, because I think, like an escape room, you're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of unlocking each chapter's puzzles. So thanks for checking this out. I think you'll have some fun with Terminal, and you're going to get a lot out of this story. And in just a moment, I'm going to show you a QR code that's going to take you to Terminal's Steam page. So please wishlist it, demo chapter 1, and then keep an eye out for the full game release soon. Thanks again.